our longest trusted English newspaper since 1898. Now available digitally. Computer. Order the Manila Times Digital Edition. Subscribed. Get the Manila Times Digital Edition for less than 2 pesos and 50 centavos per day when you sign up for 1 year. The Manila Times, news source of choice. Trusted city.
Greetings! Thank you for lending an ear to the Voice of the Times for Saturday, May 7, 2022. For today's editorial, government must act quickly to prevent inflation crisis. As expected, the Consumer Price Index or CPI increased substantially in April, with the headline inflation rate reaching 4.9%, the Philippine Statistics Authority or PSA announced on Thursday. The government should regard this piece of news as a clear warning that serious economic consequences will be felt if action to bring inflation under control is not taken immediately. Our first impression was probably similar to many people's. While inflation is definitely being felt, we should perhaps consider ourselves fortunate that it is not as high or rising as quickly as it is in other places, given the delicate state of the world economy. After all, the April inflation figure avoided, if only just, the largely psychological threshold of 5%, the level at which inflation would be universally considered an immediate crisis. The PSA breaks down inflation data by geographical area and by source, which allows us to see exactly what and where the most serious problems are. In terms of inflation in different geographical areas, inflation in areas outside the National Capital Region or AO-NCR increased faster than in the NCR, 5.1% versus 4.4%. 6 of the country's 17 regions experienced inflation higher than the 4.9% overall rate, with 3 of those, the Cordillera Administrative Region, Central Luzon, and Eastern Visayas, having year-on-year inflation over 6.1%. Digging a little deeper into these figures, it is seen that despite very high inflation in some regions, problems that obviously need to be addressed in those areas, the NCR's comparatively lower inflation is deceptive, and the most serious potential economic crisis may be here in the metro rather than elsewhere in the country. Inflation accelerated by 0.6% in AO-NCR, or 5.1% in April 2022 versus 4.5% in April 2021. But the pace of inflation in NCR nearly doubled from 2.4% a year ago to 4.4% now. In terms of sources, the 3 biggest were food and non-alcoholic beverages, which accounted for 51.5% of the increase, transport, which accounted for 27.8%, and housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels, which were responsible for 17% of the year-on-year increase in inflation. The year-on-year inflation rates of these 3 categories in April were 3.8%, 13%, and 6.9% respectively. But what is even more alarming is their month-on acceleration, the degree to which inflation has increased from March. Transport prices grew by 2.7% from the previous month, with the main culprit being diesel fuel prices, which were almost 26% higher in April than in March. Food prices accelerated by 1.2%, with vegetables driving most of the increase. Vegetable prices were 9.3% higher in April than in March. The housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuels catch-all category increased by 0.7% in April, with the biggest increase being registered by cooking fuel or LPG at 6.9% over March's prices. To reiterate, the inflation situation at the moment is not actually a serious crisis, but it has a high probability of becoming one in the coming months if proactive measures are not taken quickly by the government. What the country does not need now is the boilerplate response that has been offered by economic managers in the past few months as inflation has crept upward. That inflation is within expectations, and that no substantial action is needed as they are monitoring the situation closely. Acting to prevent a crisis is always more productive than reacting to a crisis that is already happening. Other economies, both those that are stronger and weaker than that of the Philippines, have already made that mistake and are struggling to contain the damage. What specific actions should be taken are for competent economists to determine, but the latest inflation data does at least clearly indicate where those actions should be directed. Although there are only a few weeks remaining in the current administration's term, it has a responsibility to the country to do what it can to reduce challenges the incoming administration will have to face. After all, it is all of us and not the politicians who will bear the consequences. And that's the editorial for Saturday, May 7, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to its digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and listen to the Voice of the Times.